Hi everyone. Welcome to pumpkin spice season here at Serious Eats. Today, I'm going to show you how to make the most delicious pumpkin spice lattes you've ever had. I'm just kidding. We're not making pumpkin spice lattes, but you can leave your fleece vest on. You can bring me a sack full of cider donuts. I love those. But today what we're making are stuffed pumpkins, a vegetarian dish that pleases omnivores and vegetarians alike and really should be on your holiday dinner table. It's really a dish that I made to combat the problem that vegetarians face every holiday meal, where they're forced to decide between a plate full of side dishes, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about overcooked, smelly Brussels sprouts, green beans that are no longer green, and then that kooky aunt's glazed shallots that she insists on bringing every year, and no one has ever eaten them, but they're her specialty. Or, even worse, the dreaded tofurkey. Nobody should be put through that anguish, and we're here to make a change. We're here to have a vegetarian dish that is considered delicious and deserving of being on your holiday table. Now let's get into it. This is a season when pumpkins are everywhere, whether you're at the supermarket, your farmer's market, taking the kids to a pumpkin patch / orchard to pick some apples, or even just going to the bodega to grab a carton of milk, you're probably tripping over pumpkins everywhere. So the jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, not really something that you're gonna be eating. They aren't super delicious, they aren't sweet, they start to get a little stringy as they get that large. What you can eat though are these delicious, so adorable little sugar pumpkins that I have right here. They're a manageable size. You're not serving a 3-foot pumpkin for dinner, and all of it is edible, including the skin. Maybe not the little stem, but otherwise you can put all of this pumpkin to good use, and we will for these stuffed pumpkins. When you're selecting pumpkins, a lot of times you'll see a recipe and say, find a pumpkin that's heavy for its size. You know, this should be about 1.5 pounds or so. If it's any lighter than that, odds are it's starting to turn inside and dry out, and that's not what you're looking for here. We're gonna work with 4 pumpkins here for our beautiful stuffed pumpkin dish. Use a paring knife to cut the tops of the pumpkins as if you're making jack-o'-lanterns. Then scoop the pulp and seeds out of the cavity. To reinforce the squash flavor in the dish, we're also going to roast off a kabocha squash at the same time that we par roast the pumpkins for the dish. And we're just gonna have this and scoop out the seeds the same way we did with the pumpkins. Got a big old bowl of pumpkin and squash seeds. You can definitely set these aside and sort through them to make some roast pumpkin seeds for a snack. Really delicious. Or if you don't have the time, you can always just relegate these to the compost pile. Rub olive oil on the inside of the pumpkins and kabocha squash, then season them all heavily with salt and pepper. So we've got the pumpkins and squash seasoned up, olive oil, salt, pepper. Tops go back on the pumpkins. Squash goes cut side down on a parchment-lined baking sheet, and everything goes into a 350-degree oven for about an hour. And what we're looking for is the squash to be nice and tender, cooked through, and the pumpkins themselves to start to yield a little bit, to be a little softened. And we're just jump-starting the roasting process on them so that when we stuff them and roast them for one final time in the oven, they're cooked through and delicious. So into the oven we go. While the pumpkins and squash are roasting in the oven, we can turn our attention to the mushroom and kale filling for stuffing into the pumpkins later on. What I have here is a mix of shiitake, some piopini mushrooms, as well as some oyster mushrooms, and then some nice lacinato kale, also known as dino kale. We're just gonna sear the mushrooms over high heat, add kale, then aromatics, some butter, and finish with some sherry and sherry vinegar. You can definitely use any mushrooms that you have on hand. So if you have portobello mushrooms that you're gonna be stuffing for an appetizer for your holiday meal, you certainly can just buy a few more and use those here. Certainly you can add meat to it if you don't have vegetarians and you wanted to make it, you know, with some sausage, some bacon. It'd be delicious and certainly wouldn't hurt the dish in any way. So mushrooms, a lot of water content in them. You start with a kind of large pile here. As they cook, they're releasing that moisture, cooking down, and they really won't sear until you get all of that moisture cooked out of them. Push the mushrooms to the outer edge of the skillet. Add the kale to the center and season with salt and pepper. Cook, stirring frequently until the kale is slightly wilted, and push to the outer edge once again. Add butter to the center of the skillet, followed by shallots, garlic, and thyme. Cook while stirring constantly until fragrant, then finish with sherry and sherry vinegar. The squash and the pumpkins have been roasting for about an hour. With a paring knife, I'm just gonna check that the kabocha is tender, really nice, no resistance. And then just feeling the pumpkins as well. They've got nice give to them, but they're not falling apart yet. You definitely don't want that. Just sort of pop the lid to let some steam out. And we're just gonna let the kabocha cool for a second before we scoop out the flesh and mash it up with a fork, and that will go eventually into the pumpkins for the stuffing. And in the meantime, the mushroom and kale filling is ready as well. While the squash and pumpkins cool down, we're gonna gather the other components for the dish. Not making pumpkin spice lattes, but we are making a spiced cream and actually using some of the same spices that go into your favorite PSL. We have cream, some milk, and then cinnamon, cloves, little ground ginger, nutmeg, and then for a little touch of heat, I add some spicy paprika. You can use whatever kind of paprika you have on hand. If you have smoked, if you have sweet, Hungarian, don't feel that you have to use a really hot paprika, but if you so choose, it's really great and gives a little bit of background heat to the dish. Everything goes into a large liquid measuring cup. Cream, milk, warm spices, give that a whisk, and then just season it with salt and pepper. So the spiced cream is what's gonna bind everything together once we stuff the pumpkins. Like with a bread pudding, you need some moisture to bring everything together. And you've got that nice spice note to the cream now that will permeate through the dish. We're so close to stuffing pumpkin time, but before we do that, we have to mash up the kabocha squash that we roasted off earlier. So just taking it and using a spoon to scoop out the flesh into a bowl. You can see how tender the kabocha is. It's really soft. You're barely gonna have to mash it at all. Mash up real fast with a fork the kabocha and just season it with salt and pepper. Our cast of characters: the mashed kabocha squash, some dried out bread, the kale and mushroom filling that we made before, some toasted pepitas, pecans also toasted and chopped, nice, delicious, nutty Gruyere cheese, and finally, the spiced cream. Everything going in here, into the pumpkins, layered on top of each other, and we're doing that twice. If you want to go one step further, pull out all the stops. Got one more thing that we can add to this dish, and it's a really simple miso glaze that I paint onto the pumpkins themselves. All it is a couple tablespoons of miso mixed with a couple tablespoons of honey and just a touch of water whisked all together. They're gonna be in there for about 30 minutes until they are very tender, easily pierced with a paring knife. The cheese is melted and everything is nice and hot. And they are ready. Let them cool down for a second because you don't want to cut into them right now. They'll spill everything out and they need to set up a little bit, kind of like a bread pudding. Delicious, gooey, melty cheese action happening here. You can present them as such on a serving platter. Just put them out on a table and people can dig in. You can also cut them in half into, more manageable portions. I'd say that one pumpkin serves 2 to 3 people as a main. If you're really hungry, you could certainly take one down by yourself, but you might want to make sure that there's a place to nap afterwards because it will put you down for the count. Vicky, can you pass me that knife that I have out there? Not only meat eaters get to enjoy a good steak knife, this is a time to bust one out for some vegetables and dig in. Get yourself a nice little piece with some filling. Oh yeah, make a mess, it's all good. It's Thanksgiving, everyone's family. It's a show-stopping vegetarian dish that will really wow people at your holiday table, and I guarantee there'll be a few meat eaters that will start eyeing these once they're sitting next to some dried out, kind of sad looking turkey. A lot tastier stuff happening right inside these pumpkins, so dig in. Did you try it? Did you guys do?